Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about endpoint management and some of the challenges and possibilities of managing the end user environment. To discuss that, I'm joined by Jed Ayres, Chief Executive Officer of IGEL. Jed, good to have you with us today.
James, it's a total pleasure to be on, a major honor to spend some time with you today. I'm really excited. Thank you for
Great.
having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So I think the endpoint sector is a really interesting sector. There's a lot going on with it, with edge computing, distributed computing, work from home. I know you're close to the sector. I'd like to get your sense of, what's happening with the sector this year. What are a couple of key trends that are driving things?
Well, I think COVID really accelerated everything, right, James? You had all of a sudden, tens of millions of people that were working from home, right? So left the office, and now they're hard pressed to get them back after 2 years, right? So we have this sort of hyper distributed endpoints, right? Many of which used to sort of live inside of the four walls of an office are now at an Airbnb on the other side of the world, right? And so how do you securely manage and deliver a great experience to those devices? And then also, as people come back into the office, how do you manage that? And so it's a very interesting time to be in this space, as the world has really changed dramatically over the last couple of years.
You mentioned COVID, and I think that COVID did accelerate a lot of different things, definitely edge computing and endpoint sector. But it seems like a lot of it would have happened even without COVID. Agree?
Oh, I think so. It would have probably just taken a little bit longer, right? We were on a path, but there's inertia, right? In terms of what is actually possible. I mean,
Right.
even in our own company, we have 150 developers that were in Germany, and in fact, in Germany, there's contractual laws in their contract about the size of desk and how close they are to natural light, and
Okay.
that contract specifies that they have an office location, and there's all kinds of legal implications, right? So it's a slow moving process, and then all of a sudden with COVID it was like, no, you need to be working from home, right? And so
Right.
that replicated itself across the world, I think, right? And so the inertia that is inherently in change got blown up.
Right. Okay, you talk about the inertia, but what else would be holding back endpoint management? Is there something that's particularly challenging that the companies struggle with there?
I mean, I think it's really about security, right? I mean, that's a big problem, right? When you send devices home, how do you deliver their access to their applications and their data without compromising the organization, right? And so, while a lot of organizations are set up to do that inside their own, or four walls on their own network, having tens of thousands of devices, that are doing that, and many of them just weren't set up to do it, right? They wanted to use VPNs, or maybe they had some VDI, but it was usually a 10 to 15% of the company might have had access to VDI.
Hmm.
And so there was a lot of challenges, and I think you saw hospitals and retailers and certain functions that were always inside the organization. They were driving their car to the office. I'm a guy who does invoicing for a hospital. I do it inside the hospital. Suddenly they were asked to do that outside the hospital, and they were given a fat Windows device, and some of those devices got hit with ransomware and other challenges, right? And so that's really the world we've been living in, and we've seen people scale up and use some of the technology that's available out there, whether that was Citrix or VMware or Microsoft or Amazon. We've seen scale out that would have taken years done in literally months.
Yeah, it was amazing, truly. Well, I'd like to get your sense of advice that you would give to companies to improve their endpoint management. Say they want to deploy it more, but they're struggling with it, maybe even a little scared. Maybe there's a budget issue. What would you say to them?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of very interesting technologies out there today, right? Of course, when you have this level of disruption, you have a lot of innovation that occurs. The big thing in the world of delivering, great experiences to the endpoint right now is Microsoft, right? You saw
Hmm.
Microsoft do Office 365, right? And now they've taken Windows, and they have a Windows 365 process. So it's sort of a sister to the M365 solution. And so for the first time ever, you have a very native, high fidelity product from Microsoft to deliver on the promise of a fully virtualized Windows 11, Windows 10 experience. And that commitment started back in 2015 or so by a guy named Scott Manchester, right, who actually at Microsoft been there for 20 years. He had this vision of delivering Windows in a sort of high fidelity way. They launched it in 2019, and of course, right at the perfect moment. And so I think that's one of the most exciting things, is that you have Microsoft, who owns most of the enterprise today, still, with Windows being the dominant application inside of enterprises. They are now embracing the idea of delivering a virtualized Windows experience. And so that to us is, and there's some other interesting things happening, right? Citrix was acquired and is merging with Tibco. They've historically been the biggest player in our industry around VDI. VMware also is the sort of, they came into the market in a big way in the last decade, and they were acquired by Broadcom. And so, yeah, there's some very interesting things happening in the space. And yeah, a lot of the roads today lead towards Microsoft, right? Since they own the kernel.
Well, let's talk about IGEL in particular. There's something called the IGEL Next Gen Operating System for Cloud Workspaces. Now, what is all that about?
Yeah, so IGEL has a very interesting story, right? We started as a German thin client company. I joined the company 6 years ago, and actually, what's very interesting is, the true innovation in IP is not so much the hardware we built, although we were building great kind of Mercedes-Benz like thin clients. It was really the innovation was this Linux operating system and the management tool that sort of could precisely manage that operating system at a really high scale, right? Hundreds of thousands of devices. And so what my journey with IGEL has been really bringing this operating system into the forefront. And we can put this operating system on any x86 device, and then we can sit it underneath Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, Amazon, and deliver a super high fidelity application and desktop experience. And so that's really, the amazing journey I've been on over the last 6 years is, telling this story to large enterprises, retailers, governments, financial services companies, healthcare, places where you have highly regulated, data sensitive, high security environments where they want to deliver their applications from the cloud. And you can do that very well today. And so that's really been the story of IGEL. And we've experienced tremendous growth. We were acquired last year by a Silicon Valley private equity company, TA. And so, yeah, we're on this amazing path. And we actually work with Microsoft. I mentioned Microsoft earlier, but we're their Linux kind of innovation partner. So we stood on the stage when they announced their first party product. And ironically, in the new era of Satya Nadella, Microsoft can coexist with a Linux operating system. And I think that's the thesis, James, really is, hey, in this new world order where applications and entire Windows desktops are going to be delivered from the cloud, you can actually escape this sort of very fat, heavy, expensive, hard to manage, hard to secure operating system, and you can go with a much lighter, more secure operating system that's a Linux derivative. And Linux, of course, as a fat client kind of standing next to a Windows, you could never had much market share, right? But as an invisible sort of operating system that sits underneath this solutions that are delivered from the cloud, it has a really important moment. And that's really what the moment we're meeting right now is. Linux is pervasive and all over the place, but never necessarily on the desktop. And so now we think we can do sort of what Red Hat did on the server on the endpoint.
That's fascinating. First of all, one of the really interesting points there is that the way Microsoft has evolved in terms of Linux, they really have embraced Linux. Obviously, in their long history, they weren't always so big on Linux.
No.
But now, of course, I think they feel almost neutral. I mean, they're a big Linux supporter, which I think it's ironic.
Yeah, it's a really mind shift. And I mean, I will say, even Ballmer, obviously, he understood the power of partnerships, the power of the ecosystem, and this is what that is. It's an extension of the ecosystem. IGEL can help Azure take more market share, right? They can help people move these Win32 applications into Azure. They can kind of continue the dominance of Windows, but it will be done inside of Azure. And if Linux can be the endpoint that makes it secure and high fidelity and easy to manage at scale, they're happy to work with us. In fact, we have lots of people that are doing that right now.
Let's talk about the thin client issue. So you said it fits on any machine that's an x86. So it's beyond just the thin clients.
Yeah, and we actually also have some deployments on ARM as well. It's just, there's not as many. The stack isn't quite as rich today. It's limited to Citrix. I think over time we will see more IGEL ARM deployments, but today there's such a huge install base of, there's 500 million enterprise x86 PCs that are out there, right? And this is actually one of the amazing things about IGEL around sustainability. A lot of organizations are programmed to kind of replace their desktops or laptops every 3 years, right? Because there's an ever bigger operating system that needs more horsepower to consume it. Well, all of that is being moved to the cloud, right? So now one of the beauties of IGEL is that we can run Windows 11 on a very older machine, right? That would never meet the spec of Windows 10 or 11. And so what does that do? It saves the planet, James, right? We throw 50 million tons of e-waste, and we all need to do a better job. You and I live here in California. We know the impact of, the environmental changes we're all living through, right? So if we can make decisions in organizations where we sweat these assets, instead of getting 3 years, we're getting 6, 8, 10 years out of them. Because literally, they're a receiver for the compute that's happening in the cloud. And that device can be more secure, it can be easier to manage, and it can deliver a great experience. I think that's the world we're headed towards, right? And by the way, Google is a competitor of IGEL, but their sort of Chrome architecture, that's we're building that kind of architecture for Windows inside the enterprise. That's sort of, maybe for some of your listeners, that might help them understand a little better about what IGEL is.
Right. There's a competition with Google. Seems like that's almost a natural that would rise up.
Exactly. Yeah. So we just we can work on anybody's hardware, and we have amazing partnerships. What's interesting for me is when I started, we were this German thin client company, and we were competing against these behemoths like Dell and HP and Lenovo. And now we see these companies actually partnering with us, right? They're delivering from their factory, IGEL, preloaded, pre-installed, certified, supported. They're standing behind it. They're leading with it, in fact, and saying, hey, this is a great offering, right? And so this is it's an amazing time to be in this space, really. It's going through so much change, and the anywhere workspace, or any place workspace, however you want to call it, it's here to stay. I think you can see that in the news. The employees have the power right now, and they're going to work from wherever they want. And just over time, you're going to see more innovation in this space, and it's not going away.
The other really interesting point about that is, I know that there's a lot of Linux enthusiasts. They're very, very enthusiastic about open source. And they always talked about the year of the Linux desktop. And it's been this sort of elusive target. Maybe it's 2012, maybe it's 2016. I mean, when is the year of the Linux desktop? So it's almost like you're saying the Linux desktop is here, but it's really in the cloud. It's invisible.
Yeah, well, the good news about the Linux desktop is that it actually, you don't need to be a gearhead and have scripting skills and be on GitHub all day long trying to figure out how to install things and make them work, right? The idea is that, hey, you can deliver that from the cloud, and actually the real value of Linux is it's much more stable, it's much more secure, it's way less people to manage it. We have a large retailer, 150,000 devices. They're managed by a handful of people, right? And those devices are all around the world. If that was 150,000 Windows fat clients, you would have an army of people managing that, right? You would never see an environment with 3 people managing it. And it's ultra secure without a whole stack of agents. This is the week of RSA world, right? And everybody's touting the latest and all these amazing things that we're doing to secure Windows devices, right, that are out in the wild. Well, the beauty of Linux is it's read-only, and it's got a lot of math built into how it boots every time, so it's very difficult to hack, right? And so there's a whole storyline around saving costs in terms of not. I sat next to a guy this week, he had 46 agents on his Windows image, right? You don't see that with IGEL, right? It's just by design. It's just a very secure operating system that's read only, and it's a little more than a gig in size.
Well, let's talk about the future of endpoint management and edge computing. What milestones do you see over the next few years?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that there's this move toward the cloud, right? We've seen it just in all kinds of areas, right? Where no one wants to build a data center anymore. No one wants to, host their own mail server anymore, right? Everything is about as a service. And so I think this is really where, the final frontier is convincing people that, hey, you don't need to save all your data on a device. You need to consume all of your applications and get your entire experience from the cloud, and it's just going to give you more security, more flexibility. And I think this is the beauty of where we're headed right now, right? Is an experience that people actually, the end user loves, and also IT loves, right? Because they're able to do the things to secure the assets of the company, but they also are delivering a high fidelity experience. And I think that's where you're like, okay, instead of trying to manage 500 million fat clients that a third of them are refreshing every year, bad for the planet, not the best use of human resources either, right? Having to secure and manage, and it's not the greatest experience for the end user either, right? So I think we're headed to a world where the cloud abstracts this, and we end up in a much better place for everybody. It's more elastic, it's more efficient, it's more sustainable. I mean, I think it's an amazing thing. And then we didn't even talk about IoT, but everything that's sort of to the left of the actual end user on the edge, that's also getting connected. And I think Linux will have a place there also, right? In the world of IoT, industrial IoT, sensors, all of this.
Well, I think that the world of IoT brings up the question of where the data gets crunched. It seems like that's one of the big debates that a lot of people will say, like, oh, as that IoT device gets fatter, so to speak, we're going to do more data crunching at the edge.
Yep.
But you seem to be talking about a world where no, it's really just a receptacle, so to speak, and the data will still be crunched back in the home base.
Well, at least for the end user, for the actual knowledge worker or task worker, and there is some intelligence where and this is where part of IGEL's magic, right, is threading some of the media offloading that might need to use that processor to deliver a better video experience, right? There are some areas where you want to use the local processor and some of that power there to really elegantly thread the collaboration technologies, if you will, or what have you. But yeah, I think you're gonna, for the knowledge worker and the task worker of tomorrow, they are going to consume their applications in the cloud, right? And the underlying operating system is going to get way smaller than it is today, right? The smallest version of Windows today, which is Windows IoT, is still about 16 gigs, right? It's monumentally bigger than a Linux operating system. And so I think that's where you're like, why you see Microsoft embracing the relationship with IGEL, right? It's let's get to a smaller, secure, purpose-built solution. And we're working with Microsoft on something where you open the laptop up, you put in the language, the Wi-Fi, you put in your email address, and literally a minute later, the device is completely configured for James, right? The exact image that you need, and you never see the IGEL desktop. It's just sort of invisible. It's running underneath that. It can be patched and updated very elegantly. This is the future, I believe, right? Is that whether it's Amazon, Microsoft, or some of these startups like WorkSpot and Cameo, so there's a bunch of other kind of building into the cloud solutions that are out there. This is where we're headed. Fat clients are going to be the dinosaurs, I believe, right? Bill Gates wanted to put one on everybody's desk. Now Satya wants to put a Windows experience in the cloud on everyone's desk, right? On any device too, right? It needs to also show up on your phone, or your tablet, and it needs to be able to be delivered anywhere you are.
So does the IGL solution favor one particular cloud or not really?
I mean, that's the beauty of IGEL. We're agnostic, right? We have this idea of, hey, we'll meet you wherever you are in your journey to the cloud. So we and obviously, the world is always merging and changing, and it's very heterogeneous. And so we like to take that heterogeneity and just embrace it, right? We'll take thin clients, mobile devices, desktops, we'll resurface them with this operating system, and we can connect it to Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, Amazon. We have 19 protocols inside the operating system that we can turn on. And so, yeah, we really are. Even though we're a German company, James, we like to claim we're Switzerland, right? In terms of any favoring in any one hardware platform or protocol.
It's a good strategy. I mean, I think companies are increasingly going for that. They don't want that vendor specific thing necessarily. They want interoperability. That's
Yeah.
one of the big words I would say going
Yeah,
forward.
no lock-in, I think, is really what we're trying to drive, right? And yeah, we're trying to help on the security front. We're trying to help on the management front. We're trying to help on the performance front, because yeah, this stuff is moving fast, as you probably know. Last time you logged into Zoom, it probably didn't have as many features as it does right now, right? And so
Right.
making sure that that we're tuned for all of that performance, which is the customer is the end user in this case, right? They need to have that near native fat client experience, right? And so that's really what we're trying to drive, to make sure that experience is just awesome.
Mm-hmm. Jed, I think you said it. It's really interesting stuff. I think it's going to be a super interesting sector to watch in the years ahead. Thank you
Yep.
so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, and I hope we can stay in touch, because you, like you said, things are changing just in the last few weeks, right? Some of the stuff I touched on, it's remarkable.
It does change weekly. There's no doubt. It really does change weekly.
Yeah.
All righty. Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me on. Take care. Have a nice weekend.